Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm Dr. W.F. Strong. I'm your host. Today we're going to talk with the editor of the American Heritage Dictionary. Every year they come out with a list of new words that have made the cut this year to be included in the dictionary, and we're going to talk to him about these words. What are the new words for the new year? Okay, Steve, my first question is, what is the market for, hard copy dictionaries these days?
The market for hard copy dictionaries obviously isn't the same extent that it was 10 years ago, but it is still very healthy. For both the American Heritage Dictionary and also the Webster's New World brand that we publish, sales are healthy enough to sustain several printings. We also, since we make it available electronically, both as an app and online, people do access it that way, and we're happy to make it available that way. The market is still healthy enough to allow for a print edition, for which I'm thankful. I think across the publishing industry, print sales aren't as strong as they once were, but I think there's several decades to go before they evaporate entirely.
Do you do a Thesaurus also?
Yes, we published the American Heritage College Thesaurus. The most recent edition just came out a year or two ago, and it sells fairly well. Again, not what it might have several years ago, but it still does well. And one book that does surprisingly well, or maybe not even surprisingly, is the American Heritage Dictionary and Thesaurus. It has dictionary entries on the top and thesaurus entries at the bottom. Certain school districts love it. In Texas especially, in Texas you are allowed to bring, in many testing situations, you're allowed to bring one book into the test. So educators will have bought these books in large quantities for their students, because it's something that they can use to help in the test, and it's got both the dictionary and the thesaurus component to it.
I didn't know that. I live in Texas. I had no idea that you could bring a book into the test.
In several of the standardized ones, you can. I don't know. I know different states have different numbers of standardized tests nowadays, and I don't know which test that's for. But it is the case that there is one in Texas that you are allowed to do that. So that definitely helps us.
Well, there's a strange question for you. What is the plural of a thesaurus? Is it a thesauruses or thesauri?
Like many words that come from a Greek or Latin origin, there are multiple possibilities. Both thesauruses with a regular ES or thesauri with the RUS changing to RI are both acceptable.
Well, I was thinking about it on the way over here, and I thought, well, let's see, if alumnus is singular and alumni is plural, then thesaurus would be singular and thesauri would be plural, but it's a very academic kind of question, isn't it?
Right. With certain U.S. And with words from Latin that end in U.S., one of the ways to form a plural is by changing the U.S. to I. Alumni, as you mentioned, radii, the plural of radius, and so forth.
What are our new words this year?
Right. So in 2014, we added several hundred new words and sentences, and we made thousands of revisions on top of that. As always, we like to talk about food terms because they're readily accessible to most people, whether it's from watching cooking shows or eating out, as global cuisines become more and more popular.
Wow, how many food channels are there now? That's true. It has just exploded.
There's a lot, and there's cooking competitions, and now there's cooking competitions for like preteens, and all across the age spectrum. So it's something that people are easily talk about and are familiar with. As craft beer becomes more and more popular and people explore and try different types of beer and wines, it's not surprising that some of our new terminology comes from that area. One type of beer called Saison, which is a medium-bodied ale from Belgium that has a fruity flavor and a cloudy appearance. That's an example of a new word that we added this year.
And what about in food? What are some food terms?
Right. If you are, if I assume being in Texas, you're a fan of grilling and barbecuing and
Yes.
sort of thing. There is a really delicious cheese that's thicker and chewier that you can grill. I mean, in most cases you put cheese on the grill and it just melts onto the burner or the charcoal or whatever. But this cheese called halloumi, Hloumi, is thicker and heavier, and it's brined. It's from Greece or Cyprus, traditionally made from sheep's milk or goat's milk, and it's most commonly served grilled or fried. It has a really rich, almost meaty taste
Wow.
to it, and it stands up well on the grill, and it's quite delicious. And you see this for sale in many food stores now, and it's available in a lot of restaurants that aren't Greek restaurants, which is a sign that it is something that has been anglicized or brought into English.
Well, how fascinating. I know nothing about it, and I'll have to try it. So Greek cheese with Texas barbecue.
Yes. Well, I don't know how. I think it would go with barbecue. I think of it more with steak or burgers or something. I don't know how well the taste would match with barbecue sauce, but it might actually be pretty good.
Well, we've certainly been, I would say, blended with Mexican cuisine over the past 20, 30 years. It used to be ketchup.
Right.
Ketchup was the number one condiment in Texas, and now salsa is the number one condiment.
That might even be true across the nation. And there's, like last year, I believe we spoke about the word sriracha, which is a East Asian spicy condiment that you see people. I know a lot of places where I eat. Sometimes they'll blend it with ketchup to give it a kick, and it's. Again, I could talk about food all day because it's so delicious. And you're right, Mexican and other Spanish language places are a very vital avenue of new words coming into English, especially in food.
What other food terms do we have? A couple more of new food terms that have made the dictionary this year.
Right. And one is another good example of a foreign word that's has become anglicized. There's banh mi, which is a sandwich of Vietnamese origin, often pork. It includes pickled vegetables and a spicy condiment. And like the other words that I have mentioned, it also it has crossed over from Vietnamese restaurants and is now used you'll find it in New American Cuisine restaurants. And I don't know if you've tried it, but it's also it's very delicious. Does that one ring a bell with you?
Yes, up in Austin. Up in Austin, they have quite a night culture of these little. I guess you would call them food wagons. They pull around and they have a lot of Asian cuisine and late night dining, you might call it, street dining kind of. And then so Korean barbecue and, of course, lots of Asian cuisine is available in these mobile trailers, I guess that you would call them. So, away from food, let's go to, last year, twerking was a term that some dictionaries were not ready to put in because they thought it might be a flash in the pan and a fade. And some put it in last year, some didn't. And where did you come down on the twerking debate?
We have not added it yet. It's still on our list. One word that we are adding and in the process of adding first is a word called bounce. Well, I mean, the word bounce already exists, but twerking is an example of bounce music, which is a specific kind of hip-hop from New Orleans. And before one enters twerk, one really needs to capture bounce appropriately. And that goes to show how, you just can't add words blindly, that adding one word often requires a review of other words. And a really good example of that phenomenon is with the word vape, V-A-P-E, referring to people who are smoking e-cigarettes. And the before you can add vape properly, you have to look at a bunch of other words, including smoke and cigarette, things like atomizer, vaporize. So rarely is any one term looked at. One term you can't. It's hard to add just one word without looking at a bunch of other food as well.
Mm-hmm. What about vamping?
Vamping, like when you're on a program and you need to kill time?
Well, that, and I think it's used by teenagers a lot to stay up all night watching videos, vamping, staying up all night.
Okay, that's something that we have on the radar, but have not yet added. There's absolutely nothing wrong with slang, and we have plenty of slang terminology, but we're slower to add slang to see how long it's going to take to catch on, and also, we don't want to add anything that we're going to end up taking out anytime, soon. So we like to make sure it's around for the long haul before we put it in.
What have you taken out? What words have been removed?
Very little, especially due to the fact that all of our content is available online now. It's much easier than ever to add material without taking it out. And when we put these words into print, for example, from the 4th edition to the 5th edition, we were able to add much more than we had to take out by tweaking the design, by taking out some of the front matter and other design tricks. And now when we add terminology, we can, for example, if a entry goes over by just a little bit, we can edit it slightly so it pulls back a line, which gives us space to add more material. And of course, online, we can put as much as we want.
I suppose in technology you've had the greatest explosion of all, right? And technology produces a lot of words.
Yes, and that's been the case for quite some time. And sometimes these words become so ingrained we don't even notice it anymore. But as recently as the 80s, we were adding terminology, the computer technology sense of words like cut and paste, and later words like browser and browse. All of these formerly words that had nothing to or were used in publishing in literal print senses have these analogs when working on documents online, document itself being a word like that. So computer technology and the internet does provide us with a great deal of new terminology. An example of a word that we added last year in this regard would be clickbait, which refers to those provocative or sensationalized headlines that entice you to click on a link to an article, often used as a publishing tactic to get more people to view the web page and therefore up the ad revenue. So those headlines like "You won't believe what these crazy kittens did," or that kind of thing.
Yeah, BuzzFeed is great at that. They say you will never see anything as cool as this.
Right. And, they as long as ad revenue is dependent on the number of people who click on an article, you're going to, I think this style of headline writing is going to remain very much in vogue, but collectively it's referred to as clickbait.
Yes, I have been suckered into clickbait a number of times, and often, I don't know who does this. There's someone who produces these pictures with a kind of red line and a circle, and it says, you won't believe this, and then you go there and it's really nothing. It's a disappointment. So to me, the strategy has failed after about the first 3 times. I've said I'm not going to fall for that anymore.
Right. Yeah. No. But then there are those people who will click on anything. And, so.
But it's a great term to have. Clickbait. It's a lot of times it's just nice to have a word for it.
Right.
What about trolling?
Oh, trolling. That's something I can tell you when we added that. That's been a long-standing. Prior to all these news sites being online and people making comments and inciting people to anger, back in the 90s, for example, on Usenet, which is this collection of topically related forums that could be topically related forums that people would post to just to make other people angry.
Yes.
It's been around a while. We added that sense of troll to post inflammatory or irrelevant material on an electronic forum to provoke responses. Let me see. We added that back in 2009, and at that point it had already been around for quite some time.
How do you decide to add a word? Do you have a Congress that votes on it, or how do you do it?
It depends on the kind of word. The editorial staff makes these decisions often in consultation with some of our freelance consultants, depending on the area. Sometimes it's very cut and dried. When a new chemical element is discovered on the periodic table, there is a international agency that decides what that element is going to be called. When they make that decision, boom, in it goes. Or when the International Astronomical Union decided that Pluto was no longer a planet, but that it was a dwarf planet, in goes the word dwarf planet. Obviously, most words aren't that cut and dried. So for example, last year the American Psychiatric Association published the newest edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is the book that insurers and psychiatrists use to diagnose various mental disorders. And with the new edition of that coming out, our life science editor, in consultation with our psychiatric consultant, went through the terminology and added a great deal of information based on the update to that. And so that was the two of them worked together to determine all of these new items that should go in. So, for example, from that we added social anxiety disorder, which is an anxiety disorder that is characterized by persistent, intense anxiety or fear of social settings in which one might be the focus of attention. So in those specific areas, we turn to our consultants and then in for generic or general terms like clickbait or dash cam, which is another term we entered.
Dash cam.
The editorial group, we meet and we pretty much are like-minded, and we decide what we're going to add every season.
Well, what are the terms this year that people kind of applaud, so to speak, say, oh, that's cool that you put that one in. I've been waiting for that. Clickbait would be one, I would assume.
Clickbait is definitely one of those. Another one would be cosplay, which is the act or practice of dressing in costumes, often homemade costumes. You'll see this conventions, comic book conventions, science fiction conventions, when people dress up to portray, fictional characters like Superman or Shazam or whoever. That's a term that's been around for a while, and it's spread from beyond the conventions themselves and has more or less entered the mainstream. So even people who don't dress up in costume are more familiar with the concept of cosplay now.
Yes, I was at a convention this summer, and simultaneously, unknown to me upon booking, there was a cosplay convention going on, and so it was very strange to be surrounded by Batman and Superman and Captain Kirk.
Yeah, they're very popular, and people get very creative with costumes.
They're coming for you.
Yeah, no, that's siren going by outside the office window. Sorry about that.
Well, so we have cosplay. What else? What other words?
Well, as I mentioned, going to we added dash cam, which have become more and more familiar, both from stories from Russia when talking about insurance fraud, how everyone in Russia who drives has a dash cam so that people can't scam them by creating accidents and then blaming for them. Law enforcement officials use them in cars to document what happens when people are pulled over in traffic stops, that kind of thing. Another type of word that we add are new words for existing ideas. So for what we grew up knowing as mouth-to-mouth resuscitation is now called rescue breathing. lifeguards, other first responders, EMTs will use the phrase rescue breathing rather than mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It means essentially the same thing.
Why the need for the new term?
I think in part, and this is just speculation anecdotally, I think in part among lay people who aren't EMTs and whatnot, when they encounter someone who's been drowning or choking, the concept of mouth-to-mouth kind of has this ick factor, like, oh, I have to put my mouth on someone else's mouth. And so there's, just by calling it rescue breathing, it takes away that association of, germs and needing to, get that close to someone.
So it's a euphemism.
It's a euphemism, yeah. But it's also a very descriptive one because, that is in fact what you're doing. And if it gets more people to do it when necessary, then that's, probably a good thing.
Yes, a very good thing. And so what's next on your list?
Well, one thing we like to talk about is how our usage panel, the American Heritage Dictionary has a usage panel of about 170 writers and journalists and linguists and authors and poets and the like, crossword puzzle constructors, people who use the English language as part of their day-to-day livelihood. And we will poll them yearly with a list of questions about how they feel about certain constructions or certain pronunciations or certain words. And so every year there are updates. And so, for example, there is a lot of uncertainty about how to use the word casualty, whether a casualty refers to people who have died or to people who have both died or are injured.
That's a good one. That's always confused me because I always thought of casualty as someone that would be, it would be someone wounded or killed. It would all be
exactly covered. And that's the standard sense. In military usage, a casualty would be a service person who's been killed, injured, captured, or some other way rendered unable to serve. In non-military situations, such as accidents, casualty would refer to a person who's either killed or injured. However, there are those who believe that casualty refers only to deaths rather than deaths and injuries, to the extent that we thought, let's put this before the panel. Last year, 60% of the panel disapproved of its use to mean fatalities only. That still is 40% is still a large, significant number. Yeah, and I think it's due to the fact that there is a lot of this uncertainty, and I think the takeaway from this is if one uses it, the knowledge that people, that there's a strong likelihood that members of your audience might not get what you're trying to convey. So it's something to be aware of. Obviously the correct usage, you can use the correct usage all you want, but if a significant portion of your audience isn't going to understand what you're saying, that's an indication that you might need to resort to the word fatality to mean fatality and fatalities and injuries.
So a reporter, if he's talking casualties, would go on to clarify and say, so therefore under casualties we have 50 killed in action, and then we have another 50 that are wounded. So it can clarify. That's interesting. Correct. So from time to time you find that words that were once clear become unclear.
Yeah, and a good example of that is inflammable. Does it mean able to catch on fire or not able to catch on fire? And of course, there's one clear answer, but being correct doesn't. If people are confused by what you mean and what you're trying to convey is something that's going to save their life or affect their life, it's just easier to use flammable or non-flammable. Simply because so many people aren't aware of the fact that inflammable actually means flammable.
Yes. So if you want clarity, just flammable will do.
Yes, and if you mean something that won't catch on fire, say non-flammable. Another example from our usage panel, the word spelled HARASS, there's always harass. The pronunciation harass is relatively new. It came around in the middle of the last century, and as recently as the mid-'80s, the usage panel was split 50-50 as to whether they preferred harass or harass, and right now we're talking about preferences rather than absolute right or wrong. In 2001, 70% preferred harass, and last year 90% preferred harass, and in fact 35% of the panel last year considered harass to be incorrect. And that goes to show how in a relatively short period of time, how the pendulum has swung for this term. And anecdotally, one does hear harass much more commonly on the news nowadays than harass.
Yes. Well, I always thought it was just British versus American. Harass would be British, but I never thought of harass. Doesn't sound as bad. You don't feel like you've been properly harassed,
Yeah.
If you've just been harassed. That sounds like a gentle form of harassment.
And that is true. Harass is still the preferred form in Britain, and it's interesting to note that harass wasn't much heard in the States until the 1950s or so.
But it was very popular in Britain before?
It still is. Harass is still the way it's said in Britain, and harass is how it was said in the States up into the middle of the last century.
Well, we have had quite a British invasion in American television in the past 10 years. And so I'm interested to see what happens with our pronunciation if we begin to adopt, British pronunciation of things.
Despite the popularity of shows like Doctor Who and The Office and all of those, I don't know how much of an influence that'll have on American speech, simply just due to the sheer number of Americans and American programming versus British programming. But certainly people may become more aware of the distinction.
Well, then there could be a kind of popularity to a certain pronunciation that it sounds cool that way, and so it would become in vogue to give it the British pronunciation, perhaps. So,
absolutely.
Well, we're running out of time. I thank you so much for coming on and updating us on the state of the English language in America.
Thank you so much. Your listeners can see all of these words on our website at ahdictionary.com. And as we mentioned, the book is still available in print, but you can purchase it at your favorite bookstore, independent or otherwise, at brick and mortar form or online. And it's also available as an app on the Android or Apple platform.
So any way you want to get it, it's available.
Absolutely.
Okay, Steve, thanks a lot. You have a good day.
Okay, thank you. You too.
I want to thank our sponsor, audiobooks.com, for underwriting Good Books Radio. This has been a special edition of Good Books Radio in combination with American Heritage Dictionary, looking at the new words for the new year. I'm W.F. Strong. I've been your host. Have a great day.